Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about meiosis. And meiosis is really just the process of creating gametes, so either sperm or egg cells. And it's important because it allows for variation. So if you look at all of these puppies, they're all slightly different, even though the assumption is they're coming from the same two parents. And that's because the gametes, the sperm and egg cells, shuffle around the alleles or the genes or versions of genes that those parents have, and so they inherit different combinations of those. So if you look at this picture, you'll see that kind of the phases look really similar to mitosis. Mitosis is the process of making two identical cells, and that is how all of your somatic or body cells divide. And that's great, and we need that. But meiosis, of course, sounds very similar, is different in that you're creating four unique cells, and these are going to be gametes, so they are different from the original cell. And you may also notice that you have this prophase 1, metaphase 1, anaphase 1, telophase 1, and then you go to prophase 2. So you have two divisions. So while there's some similarities, like we see that the phases and kind of the order that things go in are very similar, and it does involve division, and there is a replication of DNA before it starts, they're also different in that you have two divisions in meiosis and different cells as a result. So meiosis is super important for sexual reproduction. It reduces the chromosome number, and it creates or provides variation. If your cells or your gametes, so sperm or egg cells, had divided by mitosis, they would have the complete set of chromosomes. They would be what we call diploid cells. So that would mean that mom would contribute 46 chromosomes and dad would contribute 46 chromosomes. Now, the problem with that is when those come together, then you would have 92, I think I did the math on that right, chromosomes, and then your offspring would have double the chromosomes, and so on and so forth. And so every generation you would be doubling the chromosome number, so it would just get crazy. So you don't want that like doubling constantly of chromosome number. You want to maintain your original chromosome number. So in humans, that's 46. You get 23 from mom and 23 from dad. And you end up with a complete set. So just to do some like definitions here, sexual reproduction is where you have two parents and they create offspring or children that are unique, so not the same as either parent. So you're a combination of genes from your mom and your dad. Asexual reproduction, which is also a viable way to create new offspring, is where one parent produces offspring that are genetically identical to itself. We call those clones. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both, right? So in sexual reproduction, you have this variation in offspring, but you're never quite sure what you're going to get. So they can be better or worse adapted to the environment. Asexual reproduction, no dating, none of that stuff necessary. But you don't have a lot of variation in offspring. So if the environment changes, they're more susceptible to going extinct. So again, sexual reproduction requires a sperm and an egg cell. We call these gametes. And these are going to be what we call haploid cells. They have half the normal chromosome number. So oftentimes that's going to be represented by that N that you see there. So the sperm has, in humans, 23 chromosomes, and the egg has 23 chromosomes, and they come together to form a zygote. A zygote is just a fertilized egg. It's the first cell. So we all started out as a zygote, and then that zygote divided and divided and divided and divided by mitosis to create you. Some more kind of vocabulary that's important to have is this idea of homologous pairs. Homologous chromosomes are paired up because they have the same genes, but they may have different versions of those genes, and we call those versions alleles. Now, this can be really confusing. Think of alleles as different flavors of a gene. So, for example, eye color is a trait, and let's pretend that it's controlled by just one gene. You could have different alleles or versions of the gene for eye color, right? So they can vary slightly and result in different eye colors. So you can have blue or brown or green, and those are different alleles. They all are for eye color. And you get one version from mom and one version from dad. So the homologous chromosomes, you get one of those homologs from mom and one of those homologs from dad. And the end, you end up with a complete set. Again, haploid is when a cell contains half the normal chromosome number. So in humans, that's 23. Each species actually has its own chromosome number. And that's actually one of the reasons why offspring from two different species often don't survive or are sterile, because there's a chromosome mismatch. So anyway, haploid, half the normal chromosome number. Diploid is when you have the complete set. So the only cells in your body that are going to be haploid are going to be your gametes. So sperm or egg cells, depending on what you happen to be. Diploid are going to have two, so the complete set. In our case, that's 46, 23 from mom, 23 from dad. And those are all of your body cells. So any other cell besides sperm or egg, your skin cells, your blood cells, all of it. So again, gametes made by meiosis. The big idea is that you end up with 4 genetically unique gametes. And when we look at inheritance patterns, this will become way more important. Just another way to visualize that. You have meiosis, which reduces chromosome number, and then fertilization is when they come together and you end up with your zygote. Now, the phases of meiosis, big idea again, you have one replication of DNA before meiosis begins, and then 2 divisions. We break those into meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. Now, I put a link to an animation on the website. I would check that out and go through step by step. That way you can kind of see what's happening at each stage. Interphase, you have normal cellular activity, DNA replication occurs. During meiosis 1, in prophase, you have this really important thing that occurs called crossing over. And crossing over is where 2 homologous chromosomes, remember same genes, but sometimes different versions of the gene, they can actually exchange information. And so you end up with these really unique combinations of genes on those chromosomes. This gives you new combinations of genes on each chromosome, which again gives us that variation, which is super important because you want different combinations of alleles in offspring. Just because you inherited, an allele for eye color being blue doesn't mean you necessarily are going to be able to roll your tongue, which is also a genetic trait. Metaphase 1 also has some really important events going on. Remember, metaphase, it lines up in the middle. During metaphase 1, your chromosomes line up independently of each other. So notice that they're lining up in a double line instead of single file in mitosis. Meiosis, they start out in a double line. And they arrange independently of each other. So if you look here, possibility 1, if they lined up in this way, you would end up with that combination of alleles at the bottom. However, if they line up differently, as you see in possibility 2, you have different combinations in the bottom. So between crossing over and independent assortment, there are millions of different combinations of alleles that could occur in your gametes. And that's why you and your siblings are not going to be exactly the same or identical, unless you're identical twins, even though you have the same parents. Next, you have anaphase, and this is where those homologous chromosomes split, telophase 1, and cytokinesis. So at this point, you've separated and you've actually reduced chromosome number, but your chromosomes are still attached to that like replicated piece. So cells here, if you think about it, are actually haploid. They've reduced the chromosome number, but they're still kind of stuck together with their replicated chromatid. Meiosis 2, you actually divide those back up. So prophase 1, prophase 2, metaphase 2, no DNA replication occurs. Then you have anaphase, they're pulled apart, telophase 2. And finally, you get your gametes that are all genetically unique. I would highly recommend going through those animations, kind of following along, but just keeping in mind the big ideas. You should also go through and see if you can identify the differences between mitosis and meiosis. I've put some links up on our class website that you can explore to help you make those distinctions. One kind of easy way to remember which one is which is I remember T for 2. So in mitosis, you get 2 identical cells. In meiosis, that's where you create gametes that are different. So you get 4 haploid cells that are each genetically unique. That's the big idea there, but there's a couple of little distinctions too. So here's a link, and again, that's on the class website as well. I would kind of practice putting traits either in mitosis, meiosis, or things that they share in common. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know.